I want to be upfront with you before we get into anything else. I've covered this franchise through some genuinely painful years. I've sat in front of a camera more times than I can count and tried to find the honest version of optimism inside what was, if we're being real, a roster and an organizational culture that didn't deserve much of it. I know what Raiders offseason hope looks like when it's manufactured. I know what it sounds like. I know the specific flavor of it, that particular combination of fan loyalty and selective amnesia that convinces an entire fan base every spring that this time is different, right up until about week 6 when reality arrives and resets everything back to zero. So when I tell you that what's coming out of Las Vegas during these OTAs feels genuinely different, I need you to understand that I'm not reaching for that phrase because it sounds good. I'm reaching for it because the specific details coming out of that facility right now are the kind that don't get manufactured. They're the kind that show up when something real is actually happening inside a building. And right now in Las Vegas, in the middle of May, something real is happening. Let me walk you through all of it. The Shield, and why it matters more than you think. Let me start with the detail that has been living in my head since the first practice footage from these OTAs came out. Because it looks like a minor equipment note on the surface, and it is absolutely not a minor equipment note. Rookies coming into this Raiders program are not wearing visors on their helmets. Not Fernando Mendoza. Not any of the other first-year players stepping into this building for the first time. And Clint Kubiak made the reasoning behind that completely explicit before any of this began. In this organization, under this coaching staff, you do not earn the right to wear the shield on your helmet because you were drafted or because you signed a contract. You earn it through demonstrated work, through OTAs, through training camp, through every competitive rep, across every practice session, until this coaching staff looks at what you've actually done and decides you've shown enough to deserve to represent this organization with that shield on your face. That is the stated policy. It was visible and real from the first moment of the first practice. And I want to sit with why that matters so much because the quick version of this story treats it as a motivational anecdote and moves on. It is not an anecdote. It is a direct diagnosis of everything that rotted this franchise's culture from the inside out over the last several years, and a very specific prescription for rebuilding it. Think about what the environment inside that building looked like before Kubiak arrived. Players came to Las Vegas knowing their position was secure. Job security was practically baked into the organizational DNA. The tolerance for underperformance had been stretched across so many failed experiments that the concept of actually competing for your roster spot had quietly dissolved into something theoretical. And here's the thing about comfortable losing. It is genuinely the most dangerous kind, because it looks functional from the outside right up until the moment everything collapses and you're holding the first overall pick wondering what happened. By the way, I'm trying my best to gather all the information I can and share it with you. If you're a diehard Raiders fan like me, leave your likes and comments. I firmly believe we'll be on stage at the Super Bowl this year. I'd also appreciate it if you subscribed. Let's continue. Kubiak isn't sending accountability memos. He's not giving speeches about culture at team dinners. He's making accountability physical, visible, daily. The shield sits in a cabinet until you've earned it. Every player walking into that facility sees that every single morning. That is not motivation through words. That is culture through action. And there is a significant, meaningful difference between those two things. The Raiders held the first overall pick in this draft. That single fact should remind everyone, including the people inside that building, of the depth of the hole this organization has been digging out of. Having the first pick means you lost more than everyone else. It means the previous approach didn't just fall short, it failed comprehensively. And it means the foundation being constructed right now has to be built with a different standard of honesty and rigor than anything that came before it. For the first time in a very long stretch of difficult seasons, I genuinely believe this franchise has the right pieces aligned simultaneously. A head coach with a clear philosophy and the organizational staying power to see it through. A quarterback who fits the system and carries real franchise-level potential. A front office building intelligently and patiently without the desperate shortcuts that have produced cap disasters and roster holes in previous rebuilding attempts. All three of those things existing at the same time in the same building, pointed in the same direction, that is rarer than people acknowledge. The Raiders have it right now during these OTAs in the middle of May. The work is making sure every single person inside that building feels the full weight of having to earn what comes next. Fernando Mendoza, what these OTAs are revealing. Everything on this roster operates in the context of one central question. Is the quarterback at the center of this offense becoming what the Raiders need him to become? Because if the answer is yes, everything else gets amplified. And if the answer is no, everything else eventually becomes irrelevant. What's coming out of these OTA sessions is not the standard organizational praise that every team generates for every player in every position room every spring. It is specific, it is consistent, and it is pointing towards something real happening with this young quarterback that deserves genuine attention rather than the reflexive skepticism that Raiders fans have earned the right to carry. Start with the physical profile. 6'5", north of 230 pounds. That is a prototypical pocket passer frame, the kind of build that lets a quarterback see over interior defenders, absorb contact without losing his composure, and keep his eyes working downfield under pressure rather than abandoning the pocket the moment the first defender gets near him. The arm strength, which was a legitimate area of concern during the pre-draft process, is reportedly tracking above what the skeptics projected. He is not a deep ball specialist who leaves defensive backs frozen and staring at the sky. What he is, and what the OTA reports are consistently describing, is a quarterback who can drive the football into every window that Clint Kubiak's system creates, on time and with enough authority to make the route concepts function the way they're designed to function when a quarterback truly trusts them. The comparison making rounds in evaluative circles right now puts Sam Darnold's athleticism and movement quality alongside Jared Goff's size and frame. As a starting reference point, that's fine. But I want to be careful about leaning on it too hard, because neither element individually, nor both together, captures Mendoza's ceiling or establishes his developmental limit. What the Darnold reference does usefully is point towards something else entirely: how much organizational context shapes a quarterback's career trajectory. Darnold in New York was a cautionary tale. The same player in Minnesota became a genuinely different story, not because he transformed as a person, but because the infrastructure finally aligned with what his game needed to operate at its actual level. Mendoza is not going to have to wait years for the right situation to find him somewhere down the road. He is starting inside the right situation from the very beginning of his professional career. The coaching is aligned. The system is built around what he does. The organizational commitment to creating the right developmental environment exists from day one. That matters more than almost any other single variable when projecting how a young quarterback's career develops in its critical early stages. Now, and this is the part I keep coming back to during these OTAs, the detail that reveals more about who Mendoza actually is than any physical measurement or velocity chart ever could. He turned down a White House visit to stay at the facility and get extra work in. He is a first overall pick. His name has been at the center of the entire football conversation for months. The attention, the platform, the recognition, all of it was right there in front of him. And his response was to stay, throw roots, and keep working through the playbook. Nobody on a coaching staff tells a first overall pick he's required to skip a White House trip to get reps in. That decision lives entirely inside the player. It comes from a young man who understands with unusual clarity exactly where he stands in his own development and what this specific moment in his career actually demands, regardless of what might look more impressive or more celebrated from the outside. I've watched enough of these off-season programs to know that kind of internal priority management at 22 years old is genuinely uncommon. You cannot coach it into someone. Either it's there or it isn't. With Mendoza, it's clearly there, and it doesn't stop at one decision. Reports from these OTA sessions have him arriving before official practice begins to take snaps, both under center and from the shotgun, specifically to accelerate the timing and communication development with center Tyler Linderbaum. Both of them are new to this organization, learning this offense from scratch while simultaneously building their working relationship with each other. That quarterback-center chemistry, the instinctive, almost wordless understanding of how the ball arrives in different situations, how weight shifts communicate protection adjustments, how two players develop a shared rhythm under competitive pressure, cannot be rushed through film study. It requires accumulated physical repetitions. Mendoza is generating those repetitions before the schedule requires him to. That is not the behavior of a player surviving an off-season program. That is the behavior of a player trying to be ready before readiness is officially demanded. Ashton Jeanty and the backfield picture. Before we move further, I need to address the backfield situation properly. because the Ashton Jeanty dimension of this roster deserves genuine attention, and it's been getting lost in the quarterback and secondary conversations. Jeanty coming into this organization changes the arithmetic of what this offense can be in ways that go beyond the obvious. This is not a complimentary back. This is not a change of pace option or a third down specialist. Jeanty is the kind of running back who reframes defensive game planning around a team's entire offensive identity, the kind who forces coordinators to account for him so specifically and so heavily that it creates real structural advantages for everything else Kubiak is trying to build around Mendoza. Think about what that means for a developing young quarterback during his first professional season. When a defense has to commit real resources to stopping a back of Jeanty's caliber, the passing game opens up in ways that don't exist on rosters without that kind of ground threat. Play action becomes genuinely dangerous rather than just theoretically interesting. Safeties that should be deepening their coverage are instead creeping toward the line. Linebackers that should be dropping into zones are instead stacking the box. And suddenly, Mendoza is operating with more space, more time, and cleaner looks than most rookie quarterbacks get anywhere near in their first professional year. That is not an accident. That is Kubiak building a developmental environment that gives his young quarterback the best possible chance to succeed by making sure the infrastructure around him creates favorable conditions rather than demanding that he overcome unfavorable ones from day one. Jeanty is a central pillar of that infrastructure. And watching how these two players are developing their chemistry and their shared understanding of this offense during these OTA sessions is one of the more quietly significant storylines coming out of Las Vegas right now. Byron Crawford, the pick people keep getting wrong. Let me spend real time on Byron Crawford because the conversation around this pick has been operating at the surface level and it needs to go deeper. Third round Auburn edge rusher. Before you settle into whatever preconceived ceiling you've already assigned to a third-round edge rusher, let me walk you through what I actually saw on his tape, because it genuinely reframed my thinking about this selection. The first thing that jumps off the screen before you even begin analyzing technique is pure physical information. Crawford plays at close to 6 feet 5 inches. At the edge rusher position, that kind of length is a legitimate asset, but it almost always comes with a trade-off in movement quality. Taller pass rushers historically sacrifice lateral quickness and directional change to accommodate their frame. Crawford doesn't make that trade. The way he redirects momentum, changes direction, closes on a target, and processes information on the move, it's elite movement for someone built the way he is. That specific combination of elite length paired with elite movement athleticism is genuinely rare at this position. When you see it in a prospect, the draft slot becomes secondary. The physical foundation isn't a projection. It's already there and already visible. Where his developmental profile gets really interesting is in his actual approach to the pass rush. He is not a one-trick athlete trying to overwhelm offensive linemen with a single attribute and hoping the speed beats the set. What I see on tape is a player who already carries a real conceptual library: double hand swipes, a ghost outside speed move, skate jumps, swim moves from the interior, multiple distinct concepts being deployed within the same game against real competition. Most college edge rushers at this stage of their development have found one thing that works, and they lean on it relentlessly. Crawford is already working variations, already trying to solve the offensive tackle problem from multiple angles with multiple tools. The consistency isn't there yet. The timing on some moves is off. Against Monroe Freeling, a first-round pick in his own right, the setup on Crawford's cross-chop move isn't convincing enough, and Freeling handles it without much difficulty. But the meaningful thing is not the outcome of that specific rep. The meaningful thing is that Crawford is attempting that move at all against that level of competition, with the conceptual awareness that this kind of technical approach requires. That is not a raw athlete guessing his way through college football. That is a player with genuine pass rush instincts who simply hasn't yet been in a coaching environment capable of sharpening those instincts into reliable, deployable weapons. And that is where Rob Leonard becomes the most important part of this entire conversation. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Give Rob Leonard a defensive lineman with real movement traits, real pass rush instincts, and genuine physical tools, and he will develop that player. That's not optimism. That's following the documented evidence of his coaching career and trusting what that evidence says about what happens when he gets the right raw material to work with. Crawford is precisely that raw material. The movement quality is there. The instincts toward technical pass rushing are already showing up on tape. The length and arm strength that makes sophisticated hand fighting possible are already built into his physical profile. What he needs is the specific, detailed, consistent coaching that takes all of those existing tools and makes them genuinely dangerous at the NFL level. Leonard is built for exactly that work. One more dimension of this pick worth saying plainly, positional value is not a minor factor in draft evaluation. The same physical profile and developmental trajectory at running back has Crawford going in round 5 or 6. At tight end, similar. At edge rusher, inside the top 90 picks every single time, because the position is that premium and the market correctly prices these rare physical combinations accordingly. That is not inflation. That is the NFL accurately identifying how scarce genuine edge rushing talent with Crawford's physical foundation actually is. This pick is going to look very good in 3 years. The people who are lukewarm on it now are dramatically underweighting the developmental environment he is walking into. Tyree Wilson, the honest accounting. Tyree Wilson has spoken publicly since the trade became official, and some of what he said deserves a direct and honest response rather than polite agreement. He acknowledged that trade discussions had been progressing behind the scenes for some time before anything went public, and that both sides navigated that process with genuine discretion. Nothing leaked. Nothing became a media story while negotiations were ongoing. That is real organizational professionalism, and it deserves acknowledgement before we get to the harder part of this conversation. I genuinely wish Tyree Wilson well in New Orleans, without sarcasm and without lingering bitterness. He is a person navigating a professional situation that didn't work out in one environment, and I hope he finds the right context to show what he can actually do. But the honest evaluation has to be said plainly, he was a deeply disappointing pick for this organization. 7th overall, in a draft where that selection carries franchise-altering weight and represents one of the most consequential decisions an NFL front office makes. That pick is supposed to change a team's direction. Instead, it represented multiple years of competitive opportunity that the Raiders cannot get back. That is the honest accounting, and it needs to be on the record. Where I push back on Wilson's comments is in his stated reasoning for preferring New Orleans going forward. He talked about wanting stability, feeling valued by the Saints, wanting to leave the coaching turnover cycle in Las Vegas behind. I hear that. The skepticism was earned through real experience, and I'm not dismissing it. But I think the actual comparison of where these two franchises stand right now doesn't hold up to examination. Kubiak is not a caretaker head coach managing expectations while the front office figures out its next move. He is a football architect with a clear system, a clear organizational identity, and every structural reason to be in Las Vegas for a long time if this roster performs the way its construction suggests it can. Add Mendoza to that equation, a genuine franchise quarterback who changes the competitive projection of this organization for the next decade if he develops the way his tape says he can. Add Ginty, a generational running back talent who changes the offensive identity of this team immediately. Add a front office building with patience and intelligence rather than desperation. What you have is the structural foundation of a legitimate Super Bowl contender within a realistic time window. The Saints have interesting pieces and a quarterback with real upside, but their coaching staff's long-term durability is genuinely uncertain, and their organizational trajectory is not as clearly defined as what Las Vegas is constructing. Wilson chose New Orleans for reasons that made emotional sense given his experience. Whether those reasons hold up as the actual football picture develops over the next few years is an entirely open question. The undrafted free agents you need to know about. Let me get into the undrafted free agents from this class because this is where significant real value gets quietly built in every NFL offseason and then largely ignored by the broader conversation. Isaiah Jada is the first name I keep returning to. Offensive tackle with explosive lateral movement for his size, that genuinely surprised me when I watched him. Tackles with that kind of athleticism in their feet and hips don't typically go undrafted, and the fact that he did tells me something in his evaluation process gave teams pause. But the physical tools are real, and they're exactly the kind a good offensive line coach can develop in a depth role while the player builds his game. Watch him closely. Corey Ruckers is the wide receiver out of Arkansas State who grabbed my attention for a specific and somewhat unusual reason. He breaks tackles at a rate that is genuinely striking for a player at his position. He's not winning with elite straight-line speed on the outside. That is not his game. But at 213 pounds, the way he converts short completions into extended gains by simply refusing to go down on first contact reminds me of a lower ceiling version of how Deebo Samuel operates after the catch. In Kubiak's system, a receiver who functions as a weapon in space, someone who can be trusted in the short and intermediate game to manufacture extra yards through physicality and field vision, is genuinely valuable. Rutgers could develop into exactly that kind of offensive chess piece. Roman Hemi is the running back from Indiana who spent years playing alongside Mendoza in college, and before you file the chemistry angle away as a soft evaluation point, the familiarity between a quarterback and a running back in terms of timing, tendencies, and how each reads the other in protection and the passing game is built through real shared repetitions. Hemi has years of those reps with Mendoza already. He's not coming in as a featured back, and nobody should expect him to be. But Kubiak doesn't need a featured back in every role his system creates. He needs backs with vision and spatial awareness who can find lanes, operate cleanly in space, and contribute without creating problems. Hemi fits that description completely. And with Ginty now in the picture as the primary ground threat, Hemi's role becomes even more clearly defined. He is the insurance policy, the continuity option, the backup who already speaks the quarterback's language if anything goes sideways. Caleb Offord is the fourth name I want on your radar, and the reason I noticed him has a specific origin. I was deep in Fernando Mendoza's Indiana film when Offord kept appearing in my peripheral vision making plays that undrafted prospects simply don't typically make at that level. Downhill against the run with real physicality and conviction. Breaking up passes with the kind of anticipation that suggests he's reading the quarterback's intentions before the release rather than reacting after the fact. Playing with an edge on stunts and games that makes him genuinely difficult to account for. He jumped off tape in a way that is hard to reduce to a single measurable quality but impossible to ignore once you've seen it. Keep his name somewhere accessible because I think he has a real shot at making this roster matter. Jalen Davis, the door that closed too early. One last thing, and I want to be honest about the emotional weight of this one. The Raiders released Jalen Davis, and I understand that roster decisions at this stage of the offseason carry context and information that the public never fully accesses. I'm not second-guessing the decision with incomplete information, but I wanted to see what Rob Leonard could do with that player. And that door closing before it ever opened carries genuine disappointment for me. Davis entered the league as a first-round selection for real reasons. The physical tools at the linebacker position were undeniable. The speed, the explosiveness, the arm length, the raw athletic foundation that top evaluators look at and see something worth building. It simply never came together in an organizational context that fit him. And that is not the same as saying the evaluation was wrong or the tools weren't real. Development requires alignment between a player's profile and his coaching environment, and Davis never found that alignment the way his ability deserved. Leonard, who built his coaching reputation working with linebackers in Baltimore under Mike Macdonald, is precisely the kind of coach who might have provided that alignment. That opportunity didn't materialize. I genuinely hope Davis lands somewhere that gives him one serious real shot at showing what he can do with the right system around him, because I don't believe he's had that yet. What these OTAs are actually telling us, here's the thing I want you to carry with you as this offseason continues developing and the public narrative around this franchise keeps taking shape. The Raiders are not going through the organizational motions of a rebuild. They are constructing something with genuine structural integrity underneath the surface optimism. The philosophy is clear and consistent. The standard being enforced is visible and real from the very first moment of the very first OTA practice. The shield is not handed out based on draft position or contract value or reputation. It is earned through demonstrated work, which means every player walking into that facility in the morning is receiving a message that winning organizations always eventually communicate to their players, just in different ways at different times. Nothing is guaranteed. Nothing is assumed. Everything has to be competed for every single day, or someone else will step in and compete for it in your place. Add Ashton Ginty to the backfield, and suddenly the entire offensive construction shifts into a different conversation. Add Mendoza at quarterback showing up early, skipping White House trips, building center chemistry before anyone asks him to, and the developmental foundation starts to look like something that can actually hold weight. Add a secondary that has been transformed from a chronic embarrassment into a legitimate defensive strength. Add Crawford walking into Rob Leonard's developmental environment with the physical tools Leonard knows exactly how to refine. The Raiders are building towards something real in Las Vegas. The OTAs are showing us the early architecture of it. Not the finished product, but the structure underneath, the foundation, the parts that have to be right for everything built on top of them to hold. I have not been able to say that with genuine conviction for a very long time. Right now, in the middle of May, watching these OTA reports come out of Las Vegas, I can say it. And I think by December, a lot of people who are still treating this team as a background story are going to wish they'd been paying closer attention from the beginning.